Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining the informational meeting today. We will get started probably 5 minutes after the hour just to give everyone time to hop into the meeting. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining the informational meeting for the City of High Point study today. I'll probably give about 5 minutes after the hour to allow everyone time to hop on the meeting. Thank you so much. Thank you to everybody who is joining this informational meeting for the City of High Point Disparity Study. We will get started in just a couple minutes just to allow time for any other people to join the meeting. Thank you. Alrighty. If anyone else joins and they have questions at the end, we can always address those there. But I'm going to go ahead and get started just so that we don't waste anyone's time. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with the PowerPoint presentation we've prepared today for the High Point Disparity Study Informational Meeting. Can everyone see? Yes. Okay. Awesome. So before we get started with the presentation, we can go ahead and do some brief introductions of the GSPC team, Griffin and Strong, and then we can get into the presentation and the slides itself, which will be presented by Michelle Clark Jenkins. So firstly, my name is Hannah Rowell. I'm a Deputy Project Manager with Griffin and Strong. I'm the main point of contact for the City of High Point Disparity Study. And then I will pass it over to Michelle to do an introduction as well.
Good afternoon. I'm Michelle Clark Jenkins. I am the Senior Director of the Consulting Group of Griffin and Strong. Trinity?
Hello, everyone. My name is Trinity Williams. I'm a project manager with Griffin and Strong.
Thank you.
Do we have anyone else who's part of our team for High Point? I don't think I see anyone else.
No, I'm not seeing anyone else from our team. I just clicked through really quickly.
Okay. All right. Well, good afternoon. As I said, I'm Michelle Clark Jenkins, and I'm the project manager on this project. Next slide, please. We welcome you all this afternoon, and thank you for coming. So we're going to talk a little bit about who our firm is and about the object and purpose of the disparity study, our methodology and our study process, and our findings and recommendations, the project timeline, and at the end, there'll be an opportunity for you to ask questions. Next slide. So Griffin and Strong is a law and public policy consulting firm. We're based in Atlanta, Georgia. We specialize in disparity research, all kinds of disparity research. We also do general procurement research. We do training. We do supplier diversity. We draft legislation. We help to develop and implement remedial programs. We have 6 attorneys on our team, 2 PhDs in economics, a PhD in social psychology, and a PhD in anthropology, and all of them work specifically on this study. No study we've done has ever been challenged or overturned in court. That becomes important in a minute, and I'll show you why. Next slide, please. So 3 of our experts, we have a lot of experts actually on our team, but our 3 team members that will be leading this study are our project executive, Rodney Strong, who was the former director of contract compliance for the city of Atlanta. He was the project manager on the first major municipal post-Croson disparity study. I'll explain in a minute. what the Croson study is. And he was the principal architect of the City of Atlanta's EBO program that really became the model for the nation. He's a qualified expert witness in 2 cases. And our principal investigator, Dr. Vince Egan, has done almost 200 studies. He would be, in the unlikely event of needing it, he would be the primary expert witness. And our senior economist, Dr. Greg Price, has 25 years of experience in doing economic analysis. And he is the one who also covers any of our data gaps in terms of the econometrics. And he was recently named one of the top 40 Black economists of the last 30 years. Next slide, please. So just to answer the basic questions so that there's not a misunderstanding as to what a disparity study is or isn't, it is meant to be an objective tool that's used to determine if there are disparities in a governmental agency's procurement activities with regard to race, ethnicity, and gender groups and the various industry categories. Now, sometimes, I will tell you, sometimes it's used for race and gender neutral groups like disabled persons or veterans, but it's really not meant to do that because it's meant to see if there's been any history of discrimination. We also delve deeply into not just statistical evidence, but also anecdotal evidence. We do a deep dive into policy as well as our law review. And when we make recommendations to the city, if they're accepted, they're meant to be implemented as policy. So the reason we do disparity studies is because of this 1989 case, City of Richmond, Virginia versus J.A. Croson. And it was the first time really the courts did not accept the concept of societal discrimination in terms of having remedial programs. So the court for the first time said, in essence, you kind of have to prove the existence of discrimination. And so that is what is the outcome of this case. And so the main takeaways of that case is that the court applies strict scrutiny to anything that is race-based. And then later, in later cases, it said that anything that's gender-based is intermediate scrutiny. And those of you who maybe have a law background in law school learn that when you have strict scrutiny, it's strict in theory, fatal in fact. What that meant is that once the court is applying strict scrutiny to something means there's no way to overcome it. Well, we found ways to overcome it, and that is that you have to have a factual basis in evidence. You have to demonstrate that there is some kind of fact-based or statistically based evidence. You have to also, anything that you do has to be narrowly tailored. And what that means is that once you have an outcome of a disparity study, you have to follow those findings. So we can't make recommendations that we don't have a finding for if it's race and gender based. Our methodology sometimes may seem a little counterintuitive, but it is based on case law. So once the Croson case came out, it told us what we had to do in terms of proving, but it didn't tell us how to do it. So since 1989, there have been a string of cases in the appellate courts across the country, and particularly in the Fourth Circuit, that have tried to fashion the methodology. Because what they'll say is, well, we don't like what you did over here, but we really like that you did that. And so we began to adopt that as part of our methodology. The Adirond case really is the one that added women to the equation or gender to the equation. And then HB Roe versus Tippett is the controlling case there in North Carolina. Dr. Egan was the expert witness in that case. It was not our program. It was the North Carolina Department of Transportation's MWBE program that was called into question. Dr. Egan successfully defended it, and that has now become the controlling case. So we do also model our methodology after the methodology that was done in that circumstance that we know passed muster with the court. Next slide, please. So this is kind of an overview of our study process. I'm going to hit all of these individually. And this is why it takes at least a year to complete a study. It is pretty detailed process. So there is a legal analysis. Again, disparity studies are a creation of the court. So we do a legal analysis. We do a deep dive into your policies. A lot of time is spent collecting and cleaning data. We do relevant market analysis, what's the area that we're studying, utilization, availability, and then comparing utilization and availability and coming to a disparity analysis. And then we look at a regression analysis, which is what we call a marketplace disparities, and then the anecdotal evidence that we've collected, and then finally our report and recommendations. And of course, I'll go through each one of these individually. So the policy review, in order to know what to recommend to High Point about what we think it should be doing, we should have a pretty deep understanding about what they're already doing. And so one of the things we're looking at is their policies on their face. Do those policies represent a barrier to minority women and disadvantaged firms? And then whatever their policies are, is that understood by staff? And then is there a discrepancy between the policy as it's written and the policy as it's practiced or implemented? And then finally, what policies can be modified to promote inclusion? So after we have clean data, we've spent a lot of time looking at the data, and we're collecting, for example, 5 years of payment data. We're collecting 5 years of the city's award data. We're looking at all of their bidders as ready, willing, and able. So a lot of data is being pulled and being processed. So once we've completed that, the first analysis we do is where is the geographic location of the firms that we're studying? And so that is based on where the city is currently spending its dollars and with whom. So we start with the city of High Point, and then we pull out to Guilford County, and then to the MSA, the Greensboro MSA, and out to the CSA, and then we look for other governmental areas until we get to where the city is spending at least 75% of their dollars. That 75% comes from antitrust law, where that is kind of a definition of where your economic market is where you're spending at least 75% of your dollars. And so we don't know that yet until we've conducted that analysis, and we do that looking directly at the payments that the city has made over the last 5 years. We also disaggregate that data by 5 industry categories of construction-related professional services like A&E, other professional services like doctors, lawyers, finance, consultants, and then other services, which is really all the services that don't fall in the previous categories like printing, marketing, advertising, IT, lawn service, all fit into the other services category. And then goods is anything that's tangible. Next slide, please. So then the first analysis, and again, once we've established that relevant market, only firms in the relevant market are part of our analysis. So if we determine, for example, that the Greensboro MSA is our relevant market, which High Point is a part of, then firms who are in California are not part of our study, either is utilized or available. And because one of the things we want to do is make sure those two are consistent. So the firms who we're looking at for utilization in their location, we want that to match up with the firms we're using for availability. So utilization, we look at both prime contractors and we look at subcontractors, and we disaggregate the prime data, not only by all of those 5 categories, but we disaggregate it by year and by ethnicity. So we look at African American, Asian American, Hispanic American, Native American, and non-minority women-owned firms. And we look at what the percentage of the spend over the last 5 years has been with each of those groups, broken down by year, and then with a total. And then we do a threshold analysis. We want to look at whether contract size is an issue. So we want to look at what level of contracting the city's doing. So then the availability analysis, if we've looked at utilization, that says who has the city been paying for goods and services over the last 5 years. The availability analysis says who's out there who could be providing these services. And we use something called the list approach, which is we take the bidders, the payees, the awardees, the subcontractors, and the vendors from High Point. And then we add to that other government lists that we can find. So we'll add the hub list, we'll add the DBE list, we'll add the pre-qualified contractors, the pre-qualified consultants, Greensboro's lists, Guilford County's list, any of those lists we can find of vendors, we will add, and again, we want balance list, we'll add that to availability. And then we will compare the two, next slide, in order to do a disparity analysis. So simply put, if 10% of all of the engineers in the relevant market are owned by African Americans, are they getting 10% of the engineering dollars that were spent by the city of High Point? If they haven't been, then now we have a disparity. And that's what's called a simple disparity, just that the two don't match up. So if you have 10% utilization and you had 10% availability, that's called parity. So you have no disparity. But if you have a 10% and a 2% utilization compared to a 10% availability, now you have some sort of a statistically significant disparity. So there is a test for that. You might have 9% compared to 10%. That probably isn't statistically significant. We then do a regression analysis because now we know there's a disparity, but we have to figure out whether that disparity is likely caused by the race and gender of the firm owner. And with that, we do a regression analysis where we kind of neutralize race and gender neutral aspects that could otherwise explain the disparity. And if there's still a disparity after we've done that, then we can make what Croson calls an inference of discrimination, which means that the procurement process in High Point has been affected by the present effects of past discrimination. So that's our analysis directly of the City of High Point spend. Then we look at a private sector analysis, kind of a misnomer. It's really a marketplace disparities analysis. And the reason we do that is because the marketplace is the feeder for the availability of firms. So if the marketplace has discrimination in it and it has depression in terms of availability, then there's going to be a reduced availability of firms available for High Point to use. And the courts have said that even if we find no disparities with the spend with the City of High Point, but we find discrimination in the marketplace, that there are some jurisdictions that have allowed for there to be a program, a remedial program based on that. And so one of the ways we look at that is we look at self-employment. What's the likelihood of minority and women-owned firms being self-employed compared to non-MWBEs? We look at credit market disparities as compared to MWBEs. And then we also look at building permit data, which tells us a lot about what's happening in the construction industry as a whole. Next slide. And also another important part of our analysis, which the courts have required, is anecdotal evidence. And so we collect that through a number of media. This informational meeting is part of that. I'm sure some of you will tell us some things during the question and answer period. It's also our opportunity to kind of get to know you and any of the organizations who are represented through some of you who are here. And by the way, we really do want to partner with organizations to help us to get and collect anecdotal evidence. So if you know of an organization that you think we need to reach out to their membership, reach out to them so that they can get their membership engaged, or if you're part of one, please put that in the chat room for us so we make sure we reach out. So then we also do one-on-one randomly selected interviews. We do a survey of business owners to as broad of a group of businesses in the relevant market as we can find. That kind of becomes our baseline. So all firms, MWBE or non-MWBE or disadvantaged, we want to respond to that survey. So those of you who are here, it is critical. I can't tell you how it's important for you to respond to that survey if you get it. You know, it allows us to quantify responses. So whatever the concern, or good or bad, is, it helps us more to emphasize it when we're able to quantify it, when we're able to say X percentage of firms, when asked this question, said XYZ. So even if you're happy with things that are happening, we still need you to, it's not just a place to bring areas of concern, it's also a place to tell the city that they're doing a good job in some areas. We conduct public hearings. And that's a time when you can go on the record with your pleasure or displeasure with things in terms of the procurement process. We conduct focus groups. So if you're contacted, those again are randomly selected. If you're contacted to participate in a focus group, please say yes. And then it's important for us to meet with these civic, trade, and social organizations. So not only do we want to partner alongside them to get their membership involved, we also want to interview them, or interview you if you're represented here. And we also take letters. If organizations would like to write a letter about the study and how they feel about the involvement of minority and women-owned businesses in the procurement process at High Point, we want that as well. And then finally, if you're kind of shy and you can't or don't want to participate in any of the other areas, you can always email us your comments. We get sometimes a whole story through an email, through our email comments. Next slide, please. So at the end of all of this, we provide findings. Our findings are our findings. And then and I say that because it is whatever it is, good, bad, indifferent. Sometimes we'll see a disparity. People have asked us, do you ever do a disparity study where there isn't a disparity? And sometimes the answer to that is yes. So the findings are what they are. And then we make recommendations. Again, according to Croson, we make those recommendations based on our findings. And so Croson requires that we first look at race and gender neutral remedies, which we will do. You don't have to exhaust them, but you have to give a serious consideration to whether the disparities we find can be remedied through race and gender neutral means. And then if not, we can make recommendations for race and gender conscious remedies. Next, a slide, please. So our project timeline, we started working on this in the fall. We're in the process really of collecting data, which we'll expect to complete sometime between now and the beginning of April. Then we go into our interviews and collecting anecdotal evidence. We'll be launching the survey probably in about 3 months, I would assume. And then we'll be doing our data analysis and our draft report sometime in actually it'll probably be winter by the time we get to a draft report, and then by spring we'll be completing the study. If you want to get involved, we need you to be vocal. We need you to not just come to the information meeting, which, by the way, this is a great turnout. We need you to stay involved because we need your testimony. We need your opinions on the record. So, you know, in this day and age, sometimes it's really hard to get people to participate, and they'll say, you know, I've participated in other studies, or there've been that. We need you to come with a fresh voice for High Point. Because if you participated in Greensboro or the state of North Carolina or Charlotte or Guilford studies, that's not having an impact on High Point and what High Point's going to do. So we really do need your input here. If you are contacted and you get that survey, again, I cannot tell you how important it is to get you to fill out the survey. All of you will get it directly, as well as we do email blasts to large lists, but because you've been here today, you're going to get that. So please make sure. It probably take you about 15 minutes to fill out that survey, but it's critical. Attend the public hearing, where you can go on the record if you choose to with your concerns or your pleasure with what High Point's doing. And then we do have a designated email, highpointstudy@gspclaw.com. I'm sure Hannah will put that in the chat room. And we also do have a dedicated website. Next slide. The study email again is, Hannah, is it High Point Disparity Study or just highpointstudy@gspclaw.com?
Oh, yes, it's this one here. I will change that. It's the High Point Study at GSPC Law. I'll put it in the chat as well.
Okay. All right, great. And then our website is highpointdisparitystudy.com. Is that correct, Hannah?
Yes, and that will that has not launched quite yet, but it will launch very, very, very soon. We're in like the very final process of launching that. And I was going to suggest that I will follow up with all the participants and registrants for today's meeting with that live URL once it has launched.
Right, right. Okay. So that's our presentation, and we're open now. Any questions that you have related to the study, any questions that you have about our methodology, comments you might want to make. So what I would suggest, just a little housekeeping, please keep your comments to no more than a couple of minutes so that everyone has a chance to speak who wants to. If you get a little long-winded, you'll see me do this. You can raise your hand and we will call on you, and you can unmute. If you are, I don't know if anybody's in a car, if you're on your phone, when we've gotten done acknowledging people have their hands up, we'll allow you to unmute and speak, as well as if you're not in a position where you can raise your hand. I see Dr. Elma Hairston has raised her hand.
Yes, there's just a couple. First question, just real quick. Is this going to be available? Is this going to be at this part of the presentation? Is it going to be available in video so we can look at it again?
Yes, it will be. It'll be on the website.
Okay. Now, which one of the categories? I see you had other professional services, and there was a couple of categories. What category does leadership training, customer service training, what categories do those types of trainings fall under?
Those fall under other services. Yeah.
Okay.
Training falls under other services.
All right. Thank you.
Michelle, we have a question in the chat to please define MSA and CSA.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I get so
No, it's
used
fine.
to those
I'll
terms.
look at the chat.
Yeah. So MSA means Metropolitan Statistical Area. It is the census determination of where your economic area is. So what is the area where, you know, when you talk about Greensboro, you're not just probably talking about Greensboro, you're talking about some surrounding areas that are impacted by the economic situations in Greensboro proper. And so the Census Bureau has defined that as a certain area. And for you all, your MSA, someone probably knows that off the top of their head, but your MSA is several counties.
Mm-hmm.
And so then the combined statistical area, which is the CSA, is where they've taken a couple of metropolitan areas and put them together and said, this is kind of your outer reach. For example, where we are in Atlanta, they have one of the largest MSAs, which is 27 counties. Your MSA, I think, is 4 or 5.
And then the CSA is the Piedmont Triad, which is a 12 county region.
Right.
Alrighty, we have another question. Dr. Susan Harmon asks, will the fact that your 5-year span include the COVID years affect your data?
So it's interesting. It will affect our data because, Hannah, what's our study period?
2017 to 2020 or 2018 to 2023.
So you've got fiscal year 18, 19, 20, 20, I'm sorry, 19, 20. So it would be starting in the middle of 2018. So it would be fiscal years 19, 20, 21, 22, and 23. And so for 5 years, yeah, you're going to hit that. So what it's going to affect, and interestingly will show us, because remember I told you we break it down by year. So the interesting part of that is you're going to see the impact of COVID, because we're going to see, this is a very interesting period. I hadn't thought about that, but we're going to actually see pre-COVID, we're going to see COVID, and then we're going to see a little bit of this. I guess there is no such thing as post-COVID. And so you're going to see it by year. And so you're going to see, hopefully that's a little bit of a balance, because that's why we do look at it. Utilization by year is so we can look at trends and we can see when you have anomaly years rather than just looking at 1 year, 2 year, 3 years.
Alrighty, we have another question from Bernita Sims. How do you navigate state statuses? Example, lowest and most responsive bidder with the policy creation.
Yeah, so we take that into account. So when they say lowest, it's lowest, responsive, and responsible. So for example, if there are goals set on a project and a firm doesn't meet those goals, and they're required to demonstrate good faith efforts, or if they demonstrate good faith efforts or they meet the goal, if there's a goal on a project, then they are considered responsive. But if they don't, then that could be considered non-responsive. So that's how you, and the same thing, it's the same thing. If you don't submit a document that's required, you're deemed non-responsive. So if you're required to either meet a goal or demonstrate good faith efforts and you choose not to demonstrate good faith efforts, you're not responsive. I hope that answered that question.
A question from Hannah Kennedy. She said she was curious what the catalyst was for this specific study. And her second question was, how did we decide who to invite to this informational session?
So I can't answer the catalyst. I can't tell you what was the city's, why they decided to do a study. It is a pretty standard thing in most cities, particularly across North Carolina, is to look at, is to want to know whether they have an equitable and inclusive procurement process. Most jurisdictions want to know that. So I don't know specifically what triggered this one with High Point, but in terms of who was invited, again, those big lists, the hub list, the DOT list. We took every list we had or that we could find, and we sent email blasts, and we did a press release to the public in general. So we didn't pick and choose who was invited. We tried to find any firm, minority, women, or non-minority or woman, every firm that we could find in, in the general, because right now we don't know the relevant market. So, and invited them to this meeting. Oh, but you are all business owners. We were looking at business owners to invite.
I also did send out the information to organizations as well.
Okay, great. Dr. Hairston has her.
Well, I'm gonna step up to the plate here, and I'm gonna give you some input on the catalyst. The catalyst, from the standpoint of quite frankly, many of the minority businesses, Black businesses in particular, I'll say, have been totally overlooked when it comes to some of the contracting at High Point, and I can tell you that from experience. And I will step up to the plate and say so. The other thing that I want to ask you is, how do you ensure that good faith effort is actually taking place? Is there any barometer that gives you an indication that people are not just checking out the boxes, or are they actually utilizing good faith effort? Because there's been some questions. This is probably the fourth disparity study that I have encountered, and there is some question as to whether good faith effort is actually occurring.
Yeah, that's a really good question. As you know, the state of North Carolina has this 50-point, and as you put it, Dr. Hairston, it is in fact a checklist. But that checklist can be modified in some ways. There's some limitations in it, but it can be modified. So statutorily, there is this 50-point system that the state has that High Point is required to follow. There's nothing wrong with the checklist it gives. It gives a good checklist of things that you should be doing in order to demonstrate good faith efforts. The problem is that, of course, firms find ways to get all the 50 points without really doing anything. So again, as a result of our research, we'll look at what's happened in terms of that and make some recommendations. And some of those recommendations, including the ones we've made in other studies and that we've made even to the state, is that we want to make sure that good faith efforts is not just a checklist, that there is a consideration as to whether the firm has actually demonstrated good faith efforts or not. So we're aware of that issue, Dr. Hairston, that this checklist is problematic. And again, as we go along with our research, we'll make certain recommendations to the city of High Point on how they might adjust that if needed.
Alrighty. We don't have any other questions in the chat currently. If Michelle replied to your question and you had a follow-up question, please feel free to ask or drop it in the chat. And if there's anything else that's come up along the discussion, please feel free to drop that in the chat. I did put a reminder that if you are a representative or a leader at an organization in High Point or any of the surrounding areas, to please leave your information if you would like to. Or if you have a suggestion of an organization that we should not neglect to speak to or outreach to during the study, please leave that information.
Okay, any more questions or comments? Okay. With that, do we have anybody who's representative of the city who would like to kind of end the meeting for us? I don't think so. So I'll leave it at that if there's no one here
Michelle,
who would
I'm
like to
here.
end the meeting. Okay, Cynthia, do you want to give greetings at the same time, give goodbyes?
I will do that. I want to say for the city, thank you all for your attendance in and your interest in the disparity study and for participating in this informational session. I am the point of contact with the city for the disparity study and managing the logistical components on our end. So if you're not able to get access on the actual website once it goes live, you may reach out to me in our office, my office, or to reach out to me by email as well. And I can make sure that Griffin and Strong receives your concerns or your feedback of what you want to provide. But we just want to thank you all for participating on today. We look forward to engaging with each and every one of you in the community as we move forward with collecting the data as well as the outcome of the recommendations.
Right. Dr. Hairston, I see that you're president of the High Point NAACP. We will be reaching out to you specifically to want to do an in-depth interview with you. So we look forward to that.
I look so forward to that.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.
Mhm.
Hannah, you can put my information when you post that. You can put my information in there. So I just saw where somebody asked me to put my information in the chat.
Okay. I don't know your email off the top of my head.
It's cynthia.barnes@highpointnc.gov.
Okay. That is in the chat now.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
That was good.
Thank you. Making sure to stay on in case anyone is dropping any other information into the chat. Okay. I think I have everyone's information that was going to add anything. So thank you everyone again, and we look forward to speaking with everyone in the future and working with you. Bye, Cynthia.
Thank you. Bye.